She was 21 years old. She spoke 9 languages, the only ruler of her dynasty in 300 years to bother learning Egyptian, the language of the people she ruled. She could quote Homer from memory. She understood mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and the complex mechanics of Egyptian religious ritual. She was the last of a line of Greek pharaohs that stretched back to one of Alexander the Great's most trusted generals. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly alone. And in the summer of 48 BC, she had lost everything. This is the story of Cleopatra VII, the last true queen of Egypt, and it begins not with romance, but with survival. Cleopatra was born around 69 BC in Alexandria, the city her ancestor Ptolemy I had built on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt after Alexander the Great's death. Alexandria was one of the great cities of the ancient world. It contained the famous library, the largest collection of knowledge ever assembled in one place. It had the Pharos, the great lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, visible 50 miles out to sea. It was a city of marble and gold, of Greek philosophy and Egyptian mysticism, of merchants from every corner of the Mediterranean world. And it was the center of the Ptolemaic kingdom, a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for over 2 centuries. The Ptolemies were not Egyptian by blood, they were Greek, descendants of one of Alexander's generals who had claimed Egypt after Alexander's death in 323 BC. For 300 years they had ruled as pharaohs, adopting Egyptian dress and Egyptian religion for public ceremonies, while speaking Greek in private and maintaining Greek culture at court. Most of them never bothered to learn the Egyptian language at all. They ruled a country whose language they didn't speak, whose people they didn't understand, and whose ancient civilization they treated largely as a backdrop for their own ambitions. Cleopatra was different. From childhood, she threw herself into languages with obsessive intensity: Egyptian, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, Syriac, Median, Parthian, and Latin, in addition to the Greek she had been raised speaking. She studied at the Great Library of Alexandria, immersing herself in science, philosophy, and diplomacy. Her ancient biographers describe her as a woman of extraordinary intellectual presence, someone whose conversation alone was irresistible, who could move between languages and subjects with effortless fluency, who understood how to make every person she spoke to feel that they were the most important person in the room. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was a weak and deeply unpopular ruler, so dependent on Roman financial support that his own people called him aulites, meaning the flute player, a term of contempt. He spent years in Rome, essentially begging Roman senators to recognize his legitimacy, while his own subjects rioted in Alexandria. When he died in 51 BC, he left his kingdom to his 2 eldest children, Cleopatra, who was 18, and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, who was 10. By Egyptian and Ptolemaic tradition, the 2 were declared co-rulers. By Egyptian and Ptolemaic tradition, they were also declared husband and wife. She was 18. He was 10. It was not a marriage in any real sense. It was a legal formality, a constitutional arrangement. But it meant that Cleopatra's power was tied to a 10-year-old boy who was being used as a puppet by 3 of the most dangerous men at the Egyptian court. Those 3 men were Pothinus, the chief eunuch and court treasurer, ambitious and ruthless; Achillas, the commander of the Egyptian army; and Theodotus, the young king's tutor. Together they formed a regency council that effectively controlled Ptolemy XIII and used him as their tool for accumulating power. From the moment Cleopatra took the throne, they worked to undermine her. They spread rumors that she was planning to rule alone, without her brother. They turned the court against her. They cultivated loyalty among the soldiers, and within 2 years they had succeeded. In 50 BC, just 2 years after she had become queen, Cleopatra was forced to flee Egypt entirely. She escaped with a small group of loyal followers across the desert to Syria. There, with whatever resources she could assemble, she began building a small army. She was 20 years old, in exile in the desert, preparing to fight her own brother for the throne of Egypt. The odds against her were enormous. Ptolemy XIII controlled the army, the treasury, and the capital city. She had a few thousand soldiers and no money. But she had something her brother's advisors didn't fully appreciate: a mind that could see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. Meanwhile, events in Rome were creating an opportunity she could never have planned for. The Roman Republic was tearing itself apart. For years, two of the most powerful men in Rome, Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, had been in an increasingly tense struggle for dominance. In 49 BC, that struggle became an open civil war. Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act that was technically treason against the Roman state, and marched on Rome. Pompey fled to Greece. Caesar followed. At the Battle of Pharsalus in August 48 BC, Caesar's forces crushed Pompey's army. Pompey escaped and fled to Egypt. He believed that the young Ptolemy XIII, whose father he had helped restore to power years earlier, would protect him. He was wrong. Ptolemy's advisors saw Pompey's arrival not as an opportunity, but as a threat. Hosting the losing side in a Roman civil war was dangerous. Caesar was clearly going to win. Better to kill Pompey and present his head to Caesar as a gift, proof of Egyptian loyalty to the new master of Rome. And so when Pompey stepped off his boat on the Egyptian shore, he was stabbed to death. His head was cut off. And when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria just a few days later, Ptolemy's men presented him with it, preserved in brine, wrapped in cloth. Caesar, by most ancient accounts, was horrified. Pompey had been his enemy, but he had also been his son-in-law, once a colleague, and one of the greatest Romans of his generation. To see him reduced to a severed head presented like a gift by a foreign court was an insult to Roman dignity. Caesar did not thank the Egyptians for killing Pompey. He wept. He then announced that he would be staying in Alexandria to settle certain financial matters. Egypt owed Rome significant debts from the days of Cleopatra's father. He set up his residence in the royal palace. He sent word to both Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII that he expected them to dissolve their armies and appear before him personally to resolve their dispute. Ptolemy XIII arrived in Alexandria. Cleopatra, in the desert with her small army, received Caesar's summons and understood immediately that this was the most important moment of her life. Caesar was the most powerful man in the Roman world. Whoever controlled Caesar's support controlled Egypt. Her brother's advisors had already made their move. They were in Alexandria, whispering in Caesar's ear, shaping the narrative. If she simply walked into Alexandria as summoned, she would be walking into her brother's territory, surrounded by his soldiers, completely vulnerable. She would be captured or killed before she could speak a single word to Caesar. She needed another way in, and what she chose to do next would become one of the most famous acts of political audacity in the history of the ancient world. She was 21 years old. She had nothing but her mind, her courage, and a plan, and she had